So, welcome everyone to the Community Builders Forum. This is the monthly webinar for the Fellowship for Intentional Community. My name is Sky Blue. I am the Executive Director. And this month we have with us Don Hall, co-director of Transition US, which supports Transition Towns initiatives through a variety of programs and services all over the country. I'll let Don introduce himself a little more in a minute, but to introduce today's topic, transition towns and intentional communities. So for me, as someone who's made intentional communities, my life for the last 20 years, when this transition town thing started popping up in the US and a group was forming in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I was living at the time, it was just obvious. It just felt very obvious for me to get involved. Though I don't know that at the time I could have articulated why it was that they were compelling to me in similar ways. But at this point, sort of looking back, part of what and looking forward, part of what I think about is the FIC's current working definition of intentional community is a group of people who live together and who share common facilities and who regularly associate with each other on the basis of explicit common values. Now, this definition is meant to be both specific and inclusive, and there are the obvious sort of like, what about questions that come up. Churches, for example, are sort of the big obvious one that was like, do churches fit in that? And I've certainly thought a lot about, as a thought experiment, what would it mean for a whole city to be an intentional community? Really looking at sort of intentional community through the lens of relevancy and applicability. Like what would it have to change for a city or a town to actually meet the definition of intentional community? And at some point I was like, well, that's kind of what transition initiatives are doing. So that's, started kind of bringing the framework together of like, oh, there's this applicability and relevance question for me around intentional communities. And, looking at intentional communities specifically as models. They're laboratories for looking at how society would be different if they were based on a different set of values and culture. And so kind of the interface in my mind there between transition towns and intentional communities is starting to look at how we restructure society as a whole, not just in these little pockets that we create within mainstream society. So that's kind of some framing for this. Don's going to give us a presentation. I'll let him also introduce himself a little more. As a reminder, if you have questions, there's both the chat function and the Q&A function that you can use. We're going to let Don rock through his presentation, and then we'll get to Q&A at the end. But if you have stuff come up while the presentation is happening, feel free to use those functions to help capture those questions. So without further ado, Don, why don't you give us a little bit more about your background and take it away.
All right. Thanks so much, Guy. Thanks for hosting this. Thanks for everybody taking some time out of your day to tune in. I'm really happy to be here because I think this is a really important topic. I think there's a lot of similarities between the Transition Towns movement and the Intentional Communities movement. And I think that we could create a lot of benefit from working together more. So my name is Don Hall. I live in Sarasota, Florida at present. And I've been involved with both the Transition Towns movement and intentional communities for about 10 years now. With the transition movement, I started as an intern with the first official transition initiative in North America, Transition Colorado, when I was going to graduate school out in Boulder. That's also where I ran across intentional communities for the first time. I lived at the Chrysalis Co-op in downtown Boulder for a couple of years. And then I decided to move back to my hometown of Sarasota, Florida, and I started Transition Sarasota and ran that for about 6.5 years. And then over this past year, a little bit over a year, I started working with Transition US, and I'm now the co-director of Transition US, which, like Sky said, is really helping to support people who are building local community resilience all over the country. And I'll unpack a little bit more of what that means in a moment. I called this presentation Transition Towns, Intentional Communities for the 99%, because I would hazard to guess that less than 1% of people who are part of our modern industrial society living in what they would call intentional communities. Of course, for the vast majority of human history, people have lived in much closer community connection than we do now. And I think we may well be returning to that as economic and environmental changes make community living once again a necessity. Probably also less than 1% of our general population here in North America currently participates in the transition movement. But we have a strong aspiration to include everyone in this project. In fact, I believe that for transition to really be successful, it needs to engage people from all walks of life and a critical mass of every community. And I wonder, if this is an aspiration of the Fellowship for Intentional Community as well, to spread and grow and to share your learnings as part of this intentional communities movement with others and inspire people to live in more intentional ways. I imagine that it is. A few other questions to keep in mind during this presentation and for us to discuss after I'm done here is, how do we reach out to the 99% that aren't currently engaged in these ways? And how can transition and intentional communities learn from each other and support each other in spreading the benefits of intentional living and resource sharing to more people? There's lots of different ways that I could describe transition. But how I've decided to do it here is using the 5 stages of transition that are outlined in Transition Movement founder Rob Hopkins' 2011 book, The Transition Companion, and also drawing on my own experience running Transition Sarasota for 6.5 years. And the two are very closely aligned. There was an earlier model of how to do transition. There was the 12 steps of transition. And that was put forth in a 2008 book by Rob Hopkins called The Transition Handbook. But that was primarily speculative. That was the first few years of the transition movement, which started in 2005 in the UK. And now there are literally thousands of initiatives in 50 countries around the world. And so this model draws more from their experience as well. And I think it's important to note that these stages are not completely linear. I would say that they're more cumulative, that as you go through the stages, the earlier stages are included in the latter stages. So we don't just throw them out when we feel like we're done with them. And you can listen to this description purely as for how transition works. But you could also think about this as a model for potentially how intentional communities can spread their influence beyond their property lines and beyond their walls. So the first stage is aptly named starting out. And most transition initiatives start out with a small all-volunteer group. They start out with the general public not knowing very much about transition, what it is, and very few resources to draw on. So that's where we're starting out, but I think the real question we're looking at here throughout the process is how did they scale up over time from this position to one in which they're exerting significant influence on the future direction of their local community and helping to turn the tide of history away from increasing inequality and environmental destruction to a future that is resilient, just, vibrant, and sustainable. So I'm going to give you some examples from Transition Sarasota from each of these stages. And the first one is a screening of a documentary film that we did called The Economics of Happiness. And this is a World Cafe that people participated in afterwards. During my time with Transition Sarasota, we screened about 50 documentary films for different audiences. And I found that this was a really quick, easy, and fun way to educate people both about the challenges that we're facing at this point in history, to raise awareness about them. In Transition, we define these challenges primarily looking at three: resource depletion, climate change, and economic instability. But obviously lots of other issues involved in our current predicament. And we also use this documentary series to educate people about the many solutions that people have developed all over the world and that are available to us to start putting into place when we come together. So this is really about planting seeds for the future. And that's what the starting out stage is really about. And a few key points on starting out. You're forming an initiating group, a small group of people who want to help shepherd this initiative through the early stages. You're raising awareness, and through that process, you're building your base. So in the early stages, usually it's really like-minded people that are showing up, that already kind of intuitively understand this idea about coming together to build resilience right where we are, claiming our power to transform the world. We'll talk more about reaching out beyond the choir later, but building that base is extremely important for nurturing the initiative through the early stages, and that can be building a mailing list, Facebook following, just a real social network of people that care about these issues. But at some point, that's not enough. Not enough to sustain the initiative, to just be raising awareness. We actually have to prove our ideas out in the real world. It's not good enough to just have a great idea. We have to show that it's workable, that it can support people, that it can create livelihoods, etc. So it needs to prove itself in order to mature further. And in this, a constant sense of momentum is necessary, that this is an unfolding process, that we're going somewhere. If the energy begins to stagnate, people begin to drop off. So that's what we're doing in Deepening. We're deepening our impact, we're deepening our capacity. So this is a picture from the first project that we launched with Transition Sarasota called the Suncoast Gleaning Project, which continues to this day. I know there were a bunch of volunteers out there this morning harvesting surplus produce from Jessica's organic farm here in Sarasota for our local food bank, All Faiths Food Bank. We've done this at several local farms. And to date have provided over 300,000 pounds of local organic produce for the food insecure in our community. So this is a thing that it's very easy for people to see the impact of. Sometimes projects like time banks and alternative currencies and renewable energy cooperatives that transition initiatives engage in can be seen as more abstract. And we really wanted to do something that was easy to understand the benefit. And the benefit wasn't just for a few kind of progressive leaning people in the community, but it was a benefit for those most in need in our place. So as a result, we generated lots of positive media attention. We brought lots of people together through this project. And I could go speak to Kiwanis clubs or Rotary clubs, which tend to be pretty conservative in their makeup, and they would understand this and they would get excited about this. So in these ways, I think it was a great first project for us to really ground what we were doing, literally and figuratively. So key points of deepening are to incorporate, which goes along with developing good governance and structure for the organization, and raising funds to support doing larger and larger projects over time. These two things together really show that the organization has staying power, which is the first element that is going to lead us into the next stage of connecting. Potential partners, folks beyond the choir, are going to want to know that you're going to be around for a while, that you're not just a flash in the pan, as so many of these type of initiatives are. And showing results, building a track record, not just for getting things done, but also for competency and professionalism. Also builds a lot of trust in the community and is an important part of the deepening stage. So moving on to connecting, of course, we're connecting throughout this whole process, always, bringing in partners, bringing in new individuals. But in the early stages, those are most often people that already agree with us. It's only when we've established that track record, that reputation for professionalism and competency through the deepening stage, that then folks who might not have taken us very seriously to begin with start to come to us and say, can we partner with you? Can we work with you? Because they are looking for partners that are going to make them look good, or that they can depend on to do a good job in whatever you're partnering around. So until you can prove that, a lot of them are going to be standing on the sidelines. And no organization can change everything by itself. So we really need to be creating coalitions and wide-ranging partnerships throughout our communities. So this is a picture of some of the organizers of Greater Sarah's first annual Eat Local Week, which has now been running for 7 years. We bring together a couple dozen partners each year, farms, farmers markets, community gardens, restaurants, all aspects of the local food sector, to put on dozens of different events. And this helps us do a couple different things that are really important. One is to amplify our collective voice. So many more people are paying attention to the local food movement. And it also gets these different partners used to working together. When I started working on local food issues in Sarasota, the local food movement was already growing based on momentum nationally and internationally, but it was still very fragmented. It was kind of siloed. It didn't really function as a movement. And that's what began to happen here. And this really marked also the start of really focusing in on local food. We could have chosen to focus on strengthening our local economy or reducing our community's dependence on fossil fuels, or providing affordable shared housing. But we chose to work on local food because there was so much momentum behind it, so much energy and excitement about what was happening in the local food movement in Sarasota, and because it's an easier place to start for a smaller organization. It can be as simple as planting a seed or going to the local farmers market once a week. So it was easy to get a lot of people involved with it. We wanted to go deep rather than spread ourselves too thin, trying to address all the issues in our community. Felt that local food was connected to everything else. So if we could make a really deep impact here, that would send a strong message about transforming our energy system, our economic system, etc. And this is us receiving a proclamation from our county commissioners proclaiming Eat Local Week throughout Sarasota County. So key points of connecting: forging partnerships, other nonprofits, local businesses, local government, foundations, and all these bring in additional resources, whether they be human resources or financial resources, that then can propel further growth of the initiative. When I write draw attention, it's drawing more serious media attention. We run in our own little circles so much that sometimes you need to get a story in the mainstream media for it to kind of break through those self-contained bubbles that we have, and really start telling the general public that this is something worth paying attention to. This is something important and something maybe worth getting involved in. And starting a movement. I think Transition is well positioned to weave together a bunch of amazing things that are going on that are happening in silos. So people don't see the movement. They don't see the forest for the trees, but we can help them to do that. Moving on to building, we're talking about building the big infrastructure for a post-carbon society that every transition leader dreams about from the very beginning of this process. But without going through and doing the base building and awareness raising, starting out, creating the organizational stability and the funding and building a track record and deepening and connecting with all parts of the community in the connecting stage, these larger projects would be very difficult to pull off. But now they're here, they're within reach, having done all that work. So this was a picture from a local food entrepreneur showcase that we hosted in Sarasota, one of a few, designed to spur local investment into local food-based enterprises. We saw this as a great need because it's often a stumbling block for local food entrepreneurs to be able to access capital at reasonable rates, both for starting new businesses and expanding existing ones. And because there is over $1 trillion circulating in global capital markets, and none of that currently is going to local businesses. It's all going to national or multinational corporations. So we saw a great opportunity to shift some of those dollars towards something really positive. And so we held these events. We had TED Talks by local entrepreneurs. We had music. We had a big market. And it was a great way for them to get to know some of the people who were starting local food enterprises in our community. We also worked to establish a local investment club. We brought the founder of the Slow Money Network, with whom we partnered on this work, down to Sarasota to speak about it. And it generated some indirect investment. So people did start investing in local food businesses as a result of this work, but it's something yet to be taken up in a big way by the local community. I think because sometimes very new, very innovative ideas take a while to really settle into people's consciousness, especially when it's around money, and money means risk. And so everybody wants to know that it's safe first. But I think this was one of our first attempts at building. We also floated ideas around branding and certification for local food businesses. There was a lot of local washing going on in our community. Farmers claiming to have grown produce locally when they didn't, or restaurants claiming to have sourced produce locally when they didn't. And so responding to that need, food hub for aggregation and distribution of local produce, food shed study to determine the overall economic impact of making a 10 or 25% local food shift. So really starting to think strategically about what kind of infrastructure our community need at this point. And in the early stages, you do need to act somewhat opportunistically. You need to take advantages of the opportunities that come up, but at a certain point you have enough support and enough resources that you can really start to think strategically about what does my community need, and really go after that in a more systematic way, where one thing provides the ground for the next thing to come about. This stage is about building infrastructure, as I said before, and that could be alternative currencies, renewable energy co-ops, any of the local food initiatives that I just mentioned. Yeah, it could also mean policy change around land use development. It could also mean creating a community resilience plan for your town or city. And at this point, you can actually do that, and that plan won't just sit on the shelf gathering dust. But because you have so much support behind you, it's something that's a lot more likely to get implemented. And then I also mentioned creating livelihoods before, and I think that's extremely important because we can't be engaged 40 hours a week in livelihoods that are destroying the planet and exacerbating inequality, and then expect to undo all of that after work and on the weekends with some nonprofit volunteering. We actually have to create livelihoods where people can do this work and get rewarded for it. And not just in the nonprofit sector, but probably primarily in the business sector with social enterprises. And last but not least, daring to dream. This was very sketchily defined in Rob Hopkins' Transition Companion. What I've taken it to mean is, what would it look like if we had hundreds of initiatives here in the US or thousands of initiatives worldwide who are operating at the building stage, who are really building the infrastructure for a post-carbon society? So that's what this is about. And good news is that we already have hundreds of initiatives in the US and thousands of initiatives internationally, but most of them are not operating at full capacity. Some of them are doing amazing things, particularly in the UK, some here in the US, but a lot are stuck in the starting out, deepening, connecting stages. And we're working right now to help get this model out there and really help transition initiatives progress through the stages. So 163 official transition initiatives in the US, over 1,200 internationally. You can see that there's more than that listed in the US. The orange are local initiatives, the red are regional or national hubs. And there are a lot more initiatives that we probably don't know about that never registered themselves on the International Transition Network website. And it's really the success of these local initiatives that is going to determine the success of this movement. If they are thriving, and we keep telling the stories of them, people will see that there's really something amazing and important going on here. If we have weak initiatives and we try to just put out a flashy ad campaign or put more dots on the map, people can see through that. I think there was an initial burst of enthusiasm for transition movement when it first started and when it first came to the US. And I think now we're in a stage like, okay, well, show me that this really, really works and can really make a big difference. So I think maybe as movement, we're in the deepening stage right now, having to prove our track record. By adding all these efforts together, not just transition initiatives, but movements for local food, renewable energy, new economy, intentional communities, and more, which we as Transition US are providing resources and trainings and support for the entire community resilience building movement, which I would say intentional communities are part of. Doing that, we can achieve our ultimate goals, which are things like this: changing culture, influencing policy, and shaping history. And that sounds pretty grandiose, but I think the times we live in necessitate nothing less than that. And I think that this is how we can actually do it. Hopefully this doesn't seem too pie in the sky, but I believe that there's really a pathway for making this happen in this country and all over the world. I think this is really, really how we can win. So that was a big download about transition towns. Feel free to take a few deep breaths. And yeah, feel free to type any questions into the chat or the Q&A module as we go along here. But I want to also talk about my experience in intentional communities and how that's informed my transition work as well, because I think intentional communities are incredible living laboratories for the future that we want to create. And I've gained a lot of value from living in intentional communities, and I think we could help to spread that even more. So as I mentioned before, my first experience with this was living at the Chrysalis Co-op in downtown Boulder from 2008 to 2010. So you can see here, a big pink house, up to 16 of us living in this one house together. Which maybe not this crowd, but I can imagine people who have never lived in community thinking, wow, that sounds like a disaster. How did you do that? And the truth is it really wasn't a disaster at all. It was, perhaps until the place I'm living now, the best place I've ever lived. And it was really just an incredible joy to be there, very creative, and fairly harmonious community. And I learned a lot while I was there and have taken this into my transition work. So these are some of my lessons learned. Chrysalis was around for about 10 years before I arrived. So they worked through a lot of the most difficult issues before I showed up. And I think that's why it functioned so well and why I was able to learn so much about good community practice. So going through these step by step, working together to develop a shared purpose and vision. Chrysalis, this was living mindfully together, cultivating sustainability, and sharing ourselves with our wider community. That was part of it. I find this to be especially important in transition, clarifying our purpose together, having a stated purpose and vision, because it's such a vast field. There's so many things that we could be doing that it's important that at least among the core team, there's some unity around that sense of purpose. And it has to be developed together for people to really own it. Establish basic ground rules that everyone agrees to. We tried to keep these to a minimum at Chrysalis, but they were definitely very helpful, and they're helpful in transition groups as well. You know, if these ground rules are not made explicit, people make their own assumptions about what the rules are. And when two people's assumptions come into conflict with each other, that they don't match up, yeah, that's a point of contention. Yeah, the third point I have here is get to know potential members before inviting them to join. This might seem obvious, but a lot of transition initiatives will just invite everyone in to join the core leadership team when they get started. And often this leads to a lot of different problems because people have different levels of knowledge, they have different levels of commitment, they may have different purpose or vision if they haven't done that work. And so using a process like we did at Chrysalis, we would have people over for a dinner, and then we would have an interview where they would be able to ask us questions as well as us asking them questions. And I think the real question here is about fit. Is it a good fit? I mean, we're not trying to exclude people. We're not trying to look for the people who are just the most like us. But every member has a huge impact on the community or the transition group. And so really getting to know people before bringing them into the inner circle, I think is really important, knowing who they are. And this sort of connects up with the next point about ensuring real equality among members on every level. You know, we like to say in intentional communities that everyone is equal, and that was the case at Chrysalis. We were owned by a nonprofit organization, the Boulder Housing Coalition, and we shared the work equally, we paid in equally. But I imagine that would be different if there was a single owner for the house. And same thing in transition initiatives where you have somebody who's doing a lot of the work. And, you know, we're saying we're all equal, but some people might have more of a stake than others. Some of the people might be contributing more than others. And it's really good to either be able to work with that and develop that real equality. That's best. And if depending on circumstances, can't get to that place, at least acknowledging that in some way. And how do we work with the implicit hierarchy that actually exists in our community? Size matters for how you structure your governance. I've really been noticing that lately, and having had my first experience in a house where we had 16 members, and now living in a place where we have 4 members, being extremely formal in our governance was very necessary with 16 people in a small space. In a situation when it's 4 people that know each other really well, can actually be a detriment. It can imply a lack of trust. So really fitting the structure to the real needs of the group. Having a conflict resolution process in place before it's needed, that's the time to get it in place. We did it at Chrysalis, and it was very useful in a number of occasions. But waiting until things get stirred up, it gives the appearance of managing the conflict in a very subjective way, when we really need a sense of objectivity, clear process to help us navigate the chaos. And I know in Transition Sarasota, there was a temptation. We were always busy, and it's just everything was going well, so we could just put it off and put it off and put it off. And eventually the group, after I left, the group paid for it because there wasn't a conflict resolution process in place. And yeah, a particular conflict could have gotten a lot more smoothly if we had good policies around that. Clearly define roles and rotate them frequently to build capacity. We may think about clearly defining roles as being restrictive to people's freedom, but I actually think it frees people up to take initiative within their spheres. And rotating them frequently, this is something we've been doing with our Transition US working groups to build resilience within our groups and our network. If everybody knows how to do these different jobs, if one person falls out, it doesn't negatively impact the group. So something we did at Chrysalis as well. Making time to nurture relationships and have fun together. Again, another thing that can kind of go out the window when there's a lot of work to be done. But it's in those moments, even if it's a virtual community, like a lot of my work with Transition US, taking time to do check-ins and check-outs at each meeting, getting to know each other better, and then having fun together, getting together in person, taking retreats, having community work days even, which we did at Chrysalis and at the house that I live at right now. It builds a kind of warmth and respect for each other that when difficulties come up, we can kind of fall back on that. If we don't have that level of affection for each other within our community, when a challenge comes up, things can get very contentious and there's no mediating influence. So having fun is really serious business as well. Most obvious of these might be sharing resources to lower cost and reduce environmental impact. Yeah, I mean, certainly in intentional communities, saving money, saving time, even though there's responsibilities. 2 people cook each night. Those who don't cook, clean up. Actually made it possible to get a great home-cooked meal 7 days a week. And freed up money to be able to live in Boulder, which is a very expensive place, but also to pursue other interests, maybe not have to work quite as much. And we pursue a lot of these strategies in transition. whether it's car sharing clubs, whether it's housing co-ops, worker-owned co-ops, tool libraries, seed libraries. It's a big part of what transition is. I remember hearing, and maybe some of you can relate to this, that one of the biggest concerns for people getting into intentional community for the first time is, well, what about my privacy? And I personally never found privacy to be a problem, even with 16 people in one big house together. And I think it's a little bit of a red herring. I think has maybe more to do with kind of hiding out from the world and hiding out from life than it does with actual privacy concerns, at least in my experience. And then finally, invite the wider community to learn more and get involved. As I said before, I think these intentional communities are amazing examples of the future that we want to create. And so I think there's almost a responsibility for intentional communities to open their doors to their wider community, to educate them and get them involved. And I know a lot do. We certainly did at Chrysalis with block parties, house concerts, and people enjoyed our cooking so much, and the kind of family atmosphere that some became boarders and would pay to have 3 or 4 meals with us every week. And the cooking got really good. It was a great example of positive competition where everyone was trying to outdo everyone else. Somebody would cook something great at one meal, and then the next meal, the next pair that was cooking tried to top it. So the food just got better and better and better and better. So those are some of the lessons I learned, and I've been trying to take it into this new house that I started, appropriately named the Novus House, which Novus means new in Latin. And that just started last year. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a picture of my housemates. We've all been too busy and haven't been able to align our schedules yet, but I thought getting a picture of our chickens, which you might have been hearing in the background throughout this presentation, is the next best thing. We have about 20 different kinds of tropical fruit trees out front. We have open potlucks every Tuesday night for people to come over and share food and music around the fire. And this house isn't explicitly connected to the transition initiative here in Sarasota, but the house is owned by the board president of Transition Sarasota and definitely shares a common ethos. So we'll see in the future if these become integrated together. All right. So coming back and looking at the big picture, I could have arranged this slide in a couple different ways. I could have had the transition towns and intentional communities circles completely overlap, or 95% overlap, because in one way they do. I think a lot of both what we do and how we do it are very similar. But for clarity's sake, and also to demonstrate that I see not a whole lot of examples of intentional collaboration between the transition movement and intentional communities as of yet. I made them with this little bit overlapping, but I did want to give you one example, and it's right in there in the middle. So this is Transition Homes Community Land Trust. It's based out of Totnes in the UK, where the transition movement started, the first official transition initiative in the world. Transition Town Totnes helps to run it. It's a pretty ambitious project, 27 eco homes, and yeah, just one of the great features is a majority are affordable rental and shared ownership. This is the site plan for transition homes. And here's an artist's rendering of what part of it is going to look like. And here's a few more details about transition homes: community-led, not-for-profit, run by local volunteers, highly energy efficient homes, high quality construction, sourcing local materials from local tradespeople, food growing, renewable energy, community orchard, shared facilities, training and education opportunities for the wider community, and improved biodiversity. So I think this is a wonderful example of transition towns and intentional communities coming together, and would love to see even more of that happening. Last thing before we go into some discussion and some questions, just want to point out a few resources from Transition US that might be helpful for you, both in terms of working within your local community and also beyond it. So the first one we have here is Transition Streets. You can go on there, check out a preview of the handbook. We also have facilitation and outreach guides. This could potentially be a good conversation starter if you feel your community is kind of stuck in the mud in regards to developing greater sustainability. It's something that's been used all over the country, and we're currently developing a companion emergency preparedness handbook, which we're hoping later this summer, fall, will be released. And that's something that could be great to engage the larger community as well, as that may be the functional unit. Perhaps if you're in an eco-village, you're looking at emergency preparedness just within your village. But if you're in a co-op house, you really need to engage your whole community in that. We also have a bunch of resource guides that are available to download online for free. This one is the Governance Toolbox, but we also have guides about how to organize a film screening, start a car sharing co-op, conduct an inventory of skills and needs in your community, and how to match those up, and a lot more as well. So if you go to that website, transitionus.org/guides. And if you go to transitionus.org/training, you'll find out more about our training courses. Our main courses right now are Transition Launch, how to start a transition initiative in your community, and Effective Collaboration Training, which is more about interpersonal skills and governance. We currently have Transition Launch online running now. We've done only face-to-face courses in the past, but we're starting to move them online. Expect to do Effective Collaboration in the summer. And if anybody is interested in either of those courses, please do email me at don@transitionus.org. It's don@transitionus.org, because we'd love to know how many people are interested, and that will somewhat determine when we offer these courses. You can also host a training in your community by going to the same webpage that's on the screen. And these can be a great catalyst for bringing people together to launch a new community-wide initiative or refocus on developing healthy interpersonal relationships and governance within your group. All right. So zooming back out, love to hear any questions that have been typed into the chat or the Q&A already. Any that you want to ask live. Also love your comments on the questions that I initially posed at the beginning of this presentation about how do we reach the 99%? How can transition and intentional communities learn from each other and support each other in spreading the benefits of intentional living and resource sharing to more people? Yeah, and I think I'll stop there for now.
Cool, great, thank you, Don. So for our attendees, if you have questions or comments, you want to put them in the chat or use the Q&A function, go ahead and do that. If you are interested in actually being part of this discussion, talking live, let me know. You can either, if you go to the participants screen, you can raise your hand and that'll indicate to me that you want to talk, or you just write in the chat that you want to talk live, and I'll bring you into the discussion. We don't have any questions on the queue yet, so while people are maybe thinking of questions or want to chime in, I'll throw some questions at you or some comments you can respond to. It was interesting seeing the presentation of the different steps for a transition initiative, and it was interesting how comparable that is to the steps of forming an intentional community. You get your group together, you kind of establish the basic understanding, and then the agreements, you move towards actually acquiring land or housing or whatever it is that you're going to do. And then just as you were going through it, I was like, yeah, I mean, this is all very very similar, and to some extent I was thinking, right, it's partly just it's partly a matter of scale, and that to some extent transition initiatives are about both fostering and coordinating this whole sort of network of all of these different hubs that are values aligned towards sustainability, towards justice, towards these sorts of things, and that intentional communities and, like you said, worker cooperatives and all these different things are all different hubs in this sort of sustainable network that transition initiatives are trying to foster. So yeah, really appreciate that sort of that perspective, and looking at that, getting that framework for these different scales that we're operating on. One thing I wanted to pick your brain about a little bit is the whole, I think there's a mutual struggle with transition towns and intentional communities of around the demographics that tend to get involved, and that there tends to be a predominance of white middle class people who tend to get involved. And there's this interesting thing, and you touched on it with some of the food stuff around. There's this sort of politicization of this in a way that is not really necessary, and that if you do start to get more practical, and you start to see that, like, no, these are concerns for everyone, whether or not you're a liberal or conservative. Like, that doesn't actually matter. Everyone has to eat, this sort of thing. And so how to start getting past both the economic and the cultural barriers that tend to limit engagement and participation from a broader range of people. So I guess I'm curious if you have thoughts on how do we address that? How do we go about dealing with this sort of thing?
Yeah, definitely. It's something that's really up for us with Transition US right now, because up to this point, we have been a mostly, say, middle class and white movement. And we don't want to be that. We want to engage with people from all walks of life. And we certainly don't want people to feel that they aren't welcome. And so we're doing a lot of work right now to try to get over that particular hump movement-wide. And I think a lot of it is about reaching out in a way that not we have the answers for you, but we are interested in potentially working together. We see a potential for working together, and we have a lot to learn from you. So I think taking that attitude of humility, because we do actually have a lot to learn and we do want to work together, And I think it's also potentially refocusing on meeting people's basic needs, because if we just operate on the level of ideology, we're going to continue to get the same people coming and knocking at our door. But if we can really not only refocus on communicating how transition towns and intentional communities can meet people's basic needs in a superior way to the status quo, and prove that, then I think we'll have a lot more interest from people from all walks of life. And I know that one thing I personally do and did with Transition Sarasota was to look out for the bridge builders. So here in Sarasota, Florida, we have a highly segregated community. It's actually really pretty sad. There's a lot of distrust that's been created throughout centuries of history and abuse. And it takes a lot to heal that. And sometimes, every once in a while, somebody comes along that's able to bridge two worlds. And so I think back in 2015, I met somebody like that who was interested in working on local food issues in predominantly African-American community in Sarasota called Newtown. And he really helped us start to make connections with nonprofits in that community, and started a event called Big Mama's Collard Green Festival as part of our annual Eat Local Week. And it's been one of the best attended events in our Eat Local Week. And it shined a lot of light on the Newtown Farmers Market and led to additional collaborations. So I think those kind of bridge builders can play a real key role as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it occurs to me that I think, bravery or courage, so that willingness to reach out, or, I had a friend recently, there's a certain strength in being awkward, like being willing to be uncomfortable, being willing to be awkward, but just, going ahead and having the courage to make connections there. I'm remembering, the experience of this first transition town group that was forming in Charlottesville in 2009, and being a part of that. And a couple of the people who were really taking the lead, it was, we had some struggles around this sort of stuff, because they were coming very much from a more traditional nonprofit approach to things. And they were like, okay, let's get a website up, and let's get a flyer together, and let's, start tabling at events. And, without there being a whole lot of people who were actually involved. And it was also, very clearly, being framed in a way around sort of the cultures associated with the particular demographics of, sort of more white middle class sort of approach. And, a few of us were like, well, hold on a second. Like, it seems like we need to take a step back here and do more reaching out and this sort of thing. And I remember being told by one person, it's like, oh, well, you should join the diversity committee. And I'm like, that's not, I think we need to go a little deeper here. But, that group sort of, ended up falling apart, and a new one formed that was much more attuned to this stuff and did start reaching out to the working class and people of color led initiatives that were also doing stuff around food security or that sort of thing. It's like, as soon as we started looking, it's like, oh yeah, there actually are all these things going on that we didn't even realize, because we just didn't have a broad enough lens on the situation.
Right. Yeah. I think we're realizing that as well. And I think another big thing is, bringing in people into leadership positions in the organization and the movement that have traditionally been marginalized. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. People of color, LGBT, IQ. Yeah, I think that really speaks very loudly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's see, I'm looking over my notes here. There's you were talking about sort of the progression of transition towns initiatives. Do you I've wondered, like, what is the most developed transition town initiative out there? Like, what's the sort of like that of the biggest success story, the thing that you can point to that sort of most embodies what kind of the end goal of a transition town initiative is. And I realize that that's it's a little bit of a there's a framing thing here, and it's similar with intentional communities, or when people talk about like wanting to create sustainable communities, and I'm kind of like, well, there is no sustainable community unless the world is sustainable. But within that, just putting that sort of aside for a second, like in terms of what does the end goal for a transition town group look like, and and what do you know of as one of the shining examples out there?
Okay, I'm just going to stop the share because I think we've had that up long enough. Yeah, so it's good to see you again. Yeah, I would say there's several that are kind of on the same level in the UK. Transition Town Totnes, which is the first transition initiative in the world, is definitely one of the most successful ones. With that, not just that large eco-village project, but they're doing community redevelopment of an old industrial site in Totnes to turn it into a sustainable business park. They've incubated a lot of amazing projects like the Reconomy project that we have here in the United States, the Transition Streets project that I mentioned. They started their own currency. They have a garden share scheme. They planted nut trees all over the town. They've been raising money to build construct a wind turbine, a large wind turbine for the town, which would supply a very significant portion of its energy. They've been putting solar panels up all over. Yeah, I mean, they're really working on all fronts. I know in Bristol, England, they have currency there that's been so successful that the mayor was taking his full salary, that you could use the currency for public transit, possibly to pay a portion of your taxes. Other places where they have alternative currencies that are available in ATMs. So yeah, that has been a real success, particularly in the UK. There's some strong alternative currencies here in the US, but then a little bit slower to pick up. And then renewable energy co-ops have also been big. There's several initiatives in the UK that have done multi-million, several offerings that have raised over £1 million in each offering. And a lot of them are focused on using that to put up solar arrays on project housing in their towns, so that people who normally wouldn't necessarily be able to afford tens of thousands of dollars of upfront costs can get the benefit of that. So yeah, I see those as really, where it's starting to make a serious dent in the problem.
Right, and obviously those sorts of things that you're describing, like that involves developers, businesses, but then also obviously the local government clearly has to be very on board. I mean, being able to having the mayor take their whole salary in the local currency, or that says a lot, definitely. So I think that speaks to this sort of like incredibly multifaceted community grassroots organizing effort that has to happen. Like you got to get the business community on board, you got to get the local government on board, you've got all these, and obviously the local government's only going to get on board if majority of their constituency is saying, yes, this is something obviously that we want you to support. So what is involved in really galvanizing that? I remember it being said when I was first looking at transition town stuff is that that transition initiatives take an unprecedented level of community organizing, and so it's kind of like, yeah, that's the sort of the benchmark in my mind has been around that.
Yeah, I think that's true because we're tackling often so many different issues at once, and we're trying to do it in a really open and collaborative way. And we're trying to reinvent the way we do things as well as what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it can be very daunting prospect, but I think that's where this 5-stage model is really helpful in kind of like looking at like, okay, so how do we get from like our all volunteer group that's sitting around in a circle at the public library debating what we should do next, what film we should show next, to really changing, shaping the future of that community. And I think it shows that it's not about going from 0 to 60 or from 0 to 100.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about working along piece by piece, doing the awareness raising and brings more people in, doing one project really well and establishing some kind of track record brings more people in, weaving together a movement brings more people in. And then, you get more people, who are able to run complex projects that have, $1 million budgets or $100,000 budgets showing up because they say, this isn't just an initiative that has a few good ideas. This is an initiative that's really getting stuff done. And I think sometimes transition initiatives kind of expect everybody to flock to us. It's like, oh, we have this great idea and this beautiful vision of the future, so everybody should just be supporting us right off the bat. And, in some ways I sympathize with that. But in other ways, it's like, well, it's on us to prove ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's on us to have the staying power and be able to show the results, because there are a lot of groups that have a lot of great ideas and they fizzle, and people are fairly cynical about that and get disheartened about that. And so, yeah, I think, that's the reason we do so much kind of interpersonal and group governance work, is that the level of kind of healthiness and dynamism in the core group, in the working groups, then, radiates outward to the community. And it can either be a repelling energy if it's all scattered and ineffectual, or it can be a really magnetizing energy, if it's really thoughtfully well done, a lot of care put into it, a lot of energy and inspiration.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think that this is one of the the key places of overlap with transition initiatives and intentional communities, especially on the level of transition initiatives as organizations, as groups that are have a certain level of formality and are trying to move things forward and are trying to operate in a cooperative way and embody the kind of culture of relationships and governance and decision making that they're advocating for as well. And so obviously, I mean, as you pointed out in the presentation, there's a lot of key similarities or key things where around how you do membership and how you do decision making and how you structure roles and agreements and conflict resolution. So I think that's definitely one of the key places, parts of what we're all learning and have to share with each other.
Yeah, because I mean, it's one thing to say, intentional communities are a wonderful, noble thing to do, but there's total chaos and people are getting pissed at each other and everything's dirty and the finances are all out of whack. And it's like, yeah, to invite people into that versus like a place that's really run well and harmonious and Um, you know, and I think it's the same thing with transition initiatives. We can't expect people to come in and live in a messy, chaotic house.
Hmm.
We got to really, I mean, and particularly on the, I mean, both in both ways, intentional communities and transition towns, it's like you're really committing yourself to something, you
Hmm.
know, and so people need to, you know, I use the metaphor of the eggs in the basket. You know, if we want people to put eggs into our basket, we need to have a really good basket.
Hmm.
Because if people think their eggs are just going to fall through the basket and smash onto the ground, it's probably smart for them not to put the eggs in that basket.
Hmm.
So it's, yeah. And I think that, you know, we get so caught up in like, sometimes in just the vision of things and, you know, the virtuousness of doing it, that sometimes we kind of forget about the nuts and bolts, and that
Hmm.
all people are not necessarily going to sign up for something just from ideological reasons.
Hmm. Great. Well, we're about at time. We haven't had any questions come in, which I'm sure is a testament to the brilliance and thoroughness of the presentation and discussion. So any final comments from you, Tom, before we wrap up?
Uh, just to say, you know, I appreciate y'all taking the time for this. I know that there's a lot of things tugging at our attention these days, but yeah, I think that this is the most important work that we can be doing in the world right now, whether we call it transitions or intentional communities or new economy or resilience building or whatever. And it's, you know, just been a joy to have all of this in my life, you know, both the intentional communities part and the transition towns part. And I, you know, just how can we spread this to more people? Because I do think it's a more natural way to live, and I think it does provide a deeper satisfaction, a deeper sense of meaning, a deeper sense of wholeness.
Hmm.
Um, and I think those are things that people are longing for. They just don't really know where to find it.
Hmm.
So thanks for all that you do. And people want to learn more about transition, you can go to transitionus.org, and you're welcome to contact me at don@transitionus.org.